Today, we are diving deep into one of the most significant and longest-running legal battles in India's history, the Ayodhya dispute. Now, this was never just about a piece of land. Oh no, this was a conflict that stretched across 500 years, fueled by faith, and really it tested the very soul of the nation. So let's get into it and break down exactly how the Supreme Court reached its monumental final verdict.
So, what made this case so incredibly complex? Well, it really all comes down to a few core questions. First, who actually has the ownership right? And, where do you even start the clock? Do you go back to 1528 when the Babri Masjid was built? Or maybe the key date is 1949 when idols just appeared inside? Or is it 1992, the year the structure was demolished? And on top of all that, why did the Allahabad High Court's solution, their attempt to fix this, fail so spectacularly? You had three parties with three totally different demands. So who was right? Let's unpack it.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the 500 years of conflict, then trace the legal fight, take a hard look at the High Court's controversial verdict, and then, of course, break down the Supreme Court's final 2019 judgment. We'll even do a super quick recap at the end. First up, let's talk about those 500 years of conflict. Because honestly, to get why the final verdict happened the way it did, you have to understand where this all started. It all kicks off in 1528 with the building of the Babri Masjid. Now, for centuries, many Hindus believed it was built right on the spot of a Ram temple. This belief simmered and then boiled over into the first recorded riots in 1853. The British solution? They just split the site, an inner courtyard for Muslims and an outer one for Hindus. But things took a massive turn in 1949 when idols of Lord Ram were discovered inside the mosque. The government's reaction was to lock the whole place down. Tensions just kept rising through the 80s and 90s, finally exploding on December 6, 1992, when the Babri Masjid was torn down. So with the situation at a breaking point, the battleground shifted. It moved from the streets of Ayodhya and straight into the courtroom, kicking off a legal saga that would last for decades. And the lawsuits started flying. In 1950, a case was filed for the right to worship for Hindus. Then in 59, the Nirmohi Akhara, a Hindu sect, sued for possession. Basically, they wanted to be the managers of the site. 2 years later, in 61, the Sunni Waqf Board filed for full ownership of the mosque. And then, in a fascinating legal move, in 1989, Ram Lalla Virajman, the deity himself, considered a legal person, filed a suit for ownership of the entire site. After decades of back and forth, the Allahabad High Court finally delivered its verdict in 2010. It was a huge moment, a real attempt to solve this puzzle, but it ended up being a controversial solution that, well, just didn't hold up. Now, a key piece of evidence that the court was looking at was a report from the Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI. Their dig found proof of a large structure right under the mosque. They found these temple-like pillars with clear Hindu designs that had been reused in the mosque's construction. This led them to conclude that a 12th century temple did exist there. But, and this is a really crucial point, the ASI report had no evidence of how that temple was demolished. So based on the ASI report and all the other evidence, the Allahabad High Court came up with a pretty unique verdict. They decided to slice up the disputed 2.77 acres of land into 3 equal parts. 1/3 went to Ram Lalla Virajman, 1/3 to the Nirmohi Akhara, and the last third went to the Sunni Waqf Board. But you know what? This 3-way split made absolutely no one happy. All 3 parties immediately appealed to the Supreme Court. And in 2011, the Supreme Court basically said, hold on a minute. They called the High Court's decision strange and surprising and put an immediate stop to it, setting the stage for the final act. After one last attempt at mediation went nowhere, the case entered its final stand. The Supreme Court held a marathon 40-day hearing, which, by the way, is the second longest in India's entire judicial history. So in this final hearing, everyone laid their cards on the table. The Nirmohi Akhara argued for possession, saying they had managed the site for decades. The Sunni Waqf Board's argument was that placing the idols in 1949 was an illegal act and the mosque must be restored. And finally, Ram Lalla Virajman, pointing to the ASI report, claimed the deity was the rightful owner of the land where a temple once stood and argued that Muslims never had exclusive, uninterrupted possession. And then, after those 40 days of intense arguments and centuries of dispute, on November 9, 2019, a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court delivered its final historic judgment.
It was the moment that brought this incredibly long chapter to a definitive close. So, the very first thing the Supreme Court did was completely toss out the High Court's three-way split. They called it an unsustainable decision and a wrong relief. And the reason was actually pretty simple. None of the parties had ever asked for the land to be divided. That was the key. A court just can't give a solution that nobody was even asking for. So if splitting the land was off the table, how could the court possibly find a final solution? Well, it used a very special power it has under Article 142 of the Constitution. Think of it like a constitutional superpower. It gives the Supreme Court this extraordinary ability to do complete justice in a case, allowing it to go beyond the letter of the law to settle a dispute and, in its view, correct a historical wrong. And using that power, the Supreme Court handed down its final verdict. The entire 2.77 acres of disputed land was given to a trust, specifically for the construction of a temple. And, to balance the scales of justice, the court ordered the government to give a prominent alternate 5-acre plot of land somewhere else in Ayodhya to the Sunni Waqf Board to build a mosque.
Okay, I know that was a lot to process, so let's do a lightning-fast 30-second recap of the entire case, from start to finish. Ready? It all starts in 1528 with the Babri Masjid. Then, in 1949, idols appear inside, and the whole site gets locked down. Fast forward to 1992. The mosque is demolished, sparking the huge legal case. In 2010, the Allahabad High Court tries to split the land 3 ways, but nobody accepts it. And finally, in 2019, the Supreme Court overturns that split. It gives the 2.77-acre site to Hindus for a temple and allots a separate 5-acre plot to Muslims for a mosque. And that's it, the final Ayodhya verdict. It was a legal end to a conflict that was centuries old and rooted so deeply in faith. The judgment was meant to bring closure, but it does leave us thinking about a big question. How does a secular nation's law balance faith and attempt to heal the wounds of history? We'd love to know what you think. Let us know in the comments and tell us what other complex topic we should break down for you next.
ऐसी अच्छी वीडियोस देखने के लिए LLB स्टूडेंट अड्डा को फॉलो करें एंड सब्सक्राइब करें।